Good morning, good evening, or depending on where you are in the world, good afternoon, and welcome to today's Game Developer webinar, Poison in the Well, How a Small Portion of Players Causes So Much Toxicity in Games, sponsored by Modulate and broadcast by Informa. I'm Alyssa McAloon, publisher at GameDeveloper.com, and I will be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, and share this webinar via social media outlets, as well as participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of our presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event, but you may also download a copy of the slides via the resources widget. Toward the end of our webinar, we'll ask you to complete a survey found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. Lastly, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please click the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen, or type your issue into the Q&A area, and we'll be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. So, on to today's presentation, Poison in the Well, How a Small Portion of Players Causes So Much Toxicity in Games. Discussing today's topic is Howie, Games Industry Evangelist at Modulate, Daniel Kelley, Director of Strategy and Operations for the Anti-Defamation League, ADL, Center for Technology and Society. That one's a little bit of a mouthful, sorry about that. Justin Liebregts, co-founder and COO of Gun Raiders Entertainment, and Morgan Clark, Assistant Director of Research and Policy for the ADL Center of Technology Studies. With that, I'll hand things off to Hank.
Thank you, Alyssa. And thanks, everyone, for coming by today. We think the topic is well worthwhile, and we hope by the end, well, we hope that you do too. As Alyssa mentioned, my name is Hank Howie, and I'm the game industry evangelist for here at Modulate. I've been in the game industry now for well over 2 decades. It might actually be longer than that, but I'm just going to go with that for now. I've worked in a lot of different areas of gaming, but now, now I think it's important to maybe, I don't know, I think it's important to give back a little bit, maybe to the industry that I've enjoyed working in for so long, and I can't think of a better place to do that than trying to, maybe make the online voice chat a little bit more welcoming and safe for all of our players out there. I think it's a very noble task, and one that I'm happy to say Modulate is plenty up for, believe me. I thought I'd start things off with just going through some of the data that we here at Modulate have been able to surface. I think you'll find it quite interesting. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. This data is derived from a lot of the games that we're moderating. So this is not data gleaned for the game industry overall, although I dare say it's almost certainly directionally correct. It's been taken over a 30-day period, and over 1 million toxic offenses were identified. And again, I think it's important to note that the cut that we take on the data, given the data available to us, and given that we basically do AI-driven voice chat moderation proactively. So we're on with when our clients enable our technology. We're on and we're listening for toxic events, transgressions all the time. So this is basically an example of the data that we see coming out of for some of our clients. I think the first thing to note is that almost 9 out of 10 players that we were looking at over that 30-day period did not engage in any level of toxicity. So again, looking at the title of this webinar, we're really talking about a few bad apples here, and that's certainly the case when you start to look at just the number of folks who didn't participate in any kind of toxic activity. 90% of toxicity in voice chat, again, for the players set that we looked at, 90% of the toxicity came from just 6% of the players. I think it's in some ways, I mean, it's kind of an astounding statistic if you think about it for a second. Even more so. Oh, and by the way, I have our marketing whiz, Mark Nolan, is across the table from me. So if you see me talking like that, I'm not talking to myself, although I do that fairly often, but not in this case. So even more, then we really we were looking at the data. Okay, 6% caused 90% of the toxicity. What's even more incredible is 1% of the offenders caused 26% of the toxicity. It's just that's pretty incredible. Anyway, let's keep going, Mark. This is a good one. So if you think about this, we looked at of the offenders, we looked at how many toxic events each offender caused, and we had some real winners. And I use that word loosely. There was one offender who literally had 1,200 offenses over that 30-day period. Now, again, that can happen because for certain of our clients, they may have just had monitoring turned on, so the person wasn't necessarily getting they weren't getting action, perhaps. That's kind of up to our clients what they want to do with the technology, whether they just want to monitor or act. But yeah, in this case, there was one offender that had 1,200 toxic events, which is kind of astounding. In fact, there was another player, Mark, I don't know if it's in the slides, but there was another player that had in 35 hours of gameplay, this player had 900 offenses, literally 900. I mean, I don't know how you do. I honestly don't know how you do that. I just don't know how, and I don't really want to know how. But it would be good to get that player out of, just get them out of your game, get them offline. Just who needs it? Do we have another? That's it. Okay. So that's just the initial cut of the data that we wanted to review for the moment, and then I think the next thing we want to do is turn it over to Daniel, Kelley, and Morgan from the ADL, and they just released their Hate Is No Game, the hate and harassment online games for 2022, and they have some interesting data that I'm sure they want to talk about as well. So, Daniel, Morgan?
Sure, thanks. Thank you, Hank. It was super interesting. It's a real credit to you all. When we're talking about online multiplayer games, we don't really have the same low level of transparency that we have in social media. And so the fact that you're able to come here to this presentation today and really share some of this data from your work, I think is super a credit to you all and the work you're doing with the companies. And I think what I'll show you a little bit, and I'll share my screen here, is a little bit about who we are at the Center for Technology and Society, and then a little bit about how we think about online gaming spaces. And my colleague Morgan as well will weigh in a little bit and to give folks a little more context about when we talk about hate and harassment in online games, what does that actually look like? So to start, ADL is a 100-plus-year-old civil rights organization with a mission to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment for all. CTS's mission is that same mission, but with a focus on digital spaces. So traditionally we work on social media, but in the last several years we have changed our focus to online games. And so in general, when you think about equity and inclusion and these kinds of things, I think a lot of people think about games as media, right? They think about, whose stories are being told, what stories are, who's being represented, who's telling those stories. Or you think about the ESRB ratings in terms of is there alcohol content in this game, or is this something else? Like, is there crude humor? Well, we're talking about games as social platforms, right? In the same way we think about social media, we think about online games, right? The way that Hank was talking about voice chat in online games is in a sort of content moderation context, right? What are the rules of these spaces? Who enforces them? And where do you draw the line as game companies? So this is a little bit, when we talk about digital social platforms, these are places where people are playing games, of course, right? But also we're seeing people who are using digital social platforms, online games as digital social platforms for protests, for entertainment, for concerts and these kinds of things. And so that's the way we're sort of thinking about it. In terms of the data, as Hank said, we're looking at things from the perspective of targets of online hate and harassment, right? And so, our survey is a nationally representative survey, which asks gamers in the U.S. At different age sort of brackets about their experience of hate and harassment online. And we've seen a trend that has shown an increase over the last 4 years since we started this. 86% of American adults experience hate and harassment in online games, and 77 experience severe harassment. So when we talk about severe harassment, we're talking about behaviors like being sustained harassment, stalking, doxing, and swatting. And I think my colleague Morgan can speak a little bit about, it's one thing to see these numbers, right? To see some of the numbers that Hank presents, but it's another thing to hear a little bit about what these look like in these spaces. So Morgan, if you want to speak a little bit to that, I'll stop sharing for a second.
Yeah, of course. So like Daniel was saying, when we say these sort of terms like doxing and swatting, they seem sort of esoteric. They seem sort of not connected to the real life experience of people. And I've encountered in my research, and we've encountered, when we talk about this sort of thing, people saying, well, it's online, it's just a game, it doesn't really affect people. But I'd like to, use one example actually from my own life. I had a colleague at the university that I currently attend, whose partner her partner at the time was a game developer, and we're still not sure whether or not the doxing came from her accounts or if it came from his game developing, where he was working there. And her information was doxed where she lived, which was a graduate student building in Evanston. And somebody called and said, that they were holding her hostage and that they were going to kill her. And you could look this up. It was at Northwestern University, and there was a SWAT team that arrived, and it was a very visceral feeling because I lived in that building. I got the alert that said, everyone stay inside of your dorm rooms or your classrooms. There's a shooter on campus. You felt that surge of adrenaline. It was scary. I wasn't even in Evanston at the time, and it was still frightening for me. I had a friend who also lived in the building who had his 3-year-old daughter. And he, described looking out the window and seeing snipers aimed at all the windows around Englehart. So these sorts of actions they don't just affect, and I can't even imagine what she went through herself being there and being in the person. I'm only describing people who, the second degree it affected. And not to mention, I could go on, the students, they were describing, they were sharing TikToks and videos. I think at the time, more Snapshots at the time, but they were sharing videos like my colleagues were putting chairs outside of the doors. It was just a visceral effect. It was a visceral feeling that affected everyone, not just the 2 people or 3 people that it involved. So these sorts of actions can spread out from gaming spaces to affect large groups of people. And that's not even mentioning the money that went into this fake swatting, this fake incident. And so that's what we mean by severe harassment in online gaming spaces. These are, they're serious and they affect a huge amount of people. And that just doesn't just go for doxing, it goes for swatting, it goes for revenge porn, it goes for all different types of harassment that affect different people online.
Sure. No, I think it's a really important perspective to include here. When we talk about this data, we're talking about the ways in which people are impacted by hate and harassment online, and it has real consequences for folks. I think another stat that I will point to, if I can work this interface here, is to look at the ways in which people are targeted based on their identity. So over the past 4 years that we've done this survey, women have been the most targeted group every year. It has gone down from the initial peak in 2019, but every year women have been the most targeted group. Specifically this year, we've seen an increase in anti-Semitism in online games, of anti-Latino sentiment in online games, and anti-Muslim sentiment in online games. And I guess I would turn to Morgan again. I think one of the questions I get asked a lot from folks is, how do people even know, right? You know, when people are being targeted for their identity in online games, how do people even know whether someone is Jewish, right? Whether someone is Latino, right? In terms of their experience in an online game.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. There's a number of ways that you can figure out, sort of suss out what somebody's identity is, whether it's right or wrong. So one way is people's usernames. If your username, if you are Jewish and perhaps you use your last name, for right or wrong, if it's Stein, Goldberg, something like that, someone could assume that you're Jewish. It could be right or wrong, but that could be an assumption that someone makes. From the voice chat, if someone hears your voice, if you're playing a game and you're doing the voice chat, and someone can sort of hear if you have an accent, if you are, especially if you're your gender or your age, they can sort of suss out there what your identity is. Another way is sometimes just if the harassment is just widespread, then you're going to hit someone whose identity that is. So, for example, there was a gamer who streamed on Twitch. I forgot what his name is. The gospel gamer, or some guy who was proselytizing to children on Fortnite, trying to bring them to Christ or what have you. And he told a Muslim child that he was going to go to hell if he didn't accept Jesus into his heart. And he was just proselytizing out to anyone who he could get. But eventually he caught one Muslim child. So that in that sort of way, you can get someone's identity just by virtue of, if you say it enough times and if you're yelling into the chat, someone's identity is going to be affected. So those are a couple of different ways that your identity could be sussed out in online play. And some people, again, back to the argument, well, it's just a game. Why don't you just not use your real name? Why don't you just not use voice chat? That's unfair to people who want to play these games, who want to be involved. Women, other minorities, they should be allowed to, at minimum, use voice chat without the threat of, if I use my real voice, I'm going to be harassed and doxxed and what have you.
Yeah, it's it's sobering, to say the least. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Morgan. For the moment, if we could now, I wanted to switch over and let's hear from Justin. Justin Liebregts is the co-founder and COO of Gun Raiders Entertainment, and Justin is actually running a real live game that has real live players with live voice chat, and I know they've seen a lot. So Justin, by all means.
Yeah, you were talking about that one guy or whoever was spamming 30 hours or something, like over 1,000 issues. Yeah. I hope that wasn't our game, because we are using ToxMod.
Honestly, I don't know, Justin. This is probably But
we have things in place.
Later, maybe we can find them and we'll do so. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're taking action, right? So, whoever that is likely, if they were in our system, they'd be banned long before that happened. But yeah, I think to add to this, maybe from the VR lens, I mean, toxicity in VR feels like Morgan was saying, like visceral. It is an online game, but when you put on the headset, it's all around you, and you have somebody walk up to you and just starts screaming in your face. It just feel like very personal. I mean, they're in your personal space as much as your brain is concerned. And so, and also, in VR, we don't have the luxury of text chat, right? It's got to be voice chat, because you don't really have keyboard. I mean, most people aren't using keyboard. So, open mic voice chat is just kind of the norm for at least our game, and I think a lot of multiplayer games, especially in VR. And so moderation kind of hits one of the top of the list for issues that we can have when we look at the reviews on our game. Everyone's having a great time, 5 stars, and then we get tons of 1-star reviews that are just like people were screaming or like people are just yelling, and so 1 star, like, no good, the community sucks. And so that was a flag for us before we started using this proactive voice moderation stuff, which is what prompted us to give it a try. And it's been working. The community's loving. I think overall people are happy that toxicity is down. Looking at our hard numbers, the amount of toxic occurrences that any player experiences has been about halved. It used to be about 70% of the time, like, someone would encounter something toxic, and now it's dropped down to about 35. So that's been
wow
for us. Yeah. And it also, we did have moderation stuff in before, like community reporting, and if you see something, you report it, but without having kind of the hard data, you don't know who, should we ban this guy? I don't know. A bunch of people said that they were saying bad stuff, but it's hard to know, who's telling the truth. Sometimes people just bully other people and report them, or they lost to them, so they're just reporting them out of spite, and it's not really related to toxicity. And so that's where I think a tool like ToxMod has been really helpful for us, where, if somebody's reporting something outside of the tool, we can just look it up and see, is that person actually being toxic or not? And then if they are, we can take action. And then we also have the automated side, which is great, which kind of helps us automatically moderate kind of the worst offenders, so we don't have to deal with them. They just get taken out right away. So I mean, in general, it's been a pretty interesting last year, pre-using the ToxMod tool and then working with moderation. I could go on. I don't want to monopolize the chat here.
No, it's yeah. In fact, your last comment was it's an interesting lead into one of the first questions we have coming in from the audience, which is, what exactly does proactive voice moderation mean? And essentially, it's the distinction between, as Justin was just saying, a lot of game companies, game runners, they're usually their first line of defense is to basically try and refer to player reports, right? As Justin was saying, occasionally players will fill out, will report other players for toxic behavior, but there are lots of problems with that. In the first place, we have data that suggests that there's less than 10% of players, in fact, about 8% of players will report someone. So that means 90% of the players who are experiencing toxicity never do file a player report. On top of that, it's exactly the situation that Justin talked about, which is then you have to sort of determine the veracity of that player report. Was that player really being toxic, or is the player who reported them just mad at them because they just dusted them in the game? And then there's a number of we hear from a lot of game companies out there who are basically they're relying on player reports, but the fact of the matter is they can't really address those player reports in a timely fashion. So a lot of the player reports are just sitting there, and they're grotesquely behind in addressing them. So, and that's why, and then players just kind of we hear from a lot of players to say, I just don't even bother filling out reports anymore because it doesn't seem like anything ever happens. And sometimes I'll report a player, and then I see that very same player in the game, shortly thereafter, or they never left the game, they never got kicked out of the game. So anyway. That what I just described would be described as reactive voice chat moderation. What proactive voice chat moderation is again, and I'm not going to get into too big of a commercial here about ToxMod and Modulate as a company, but the fact of the matter is that ToxMod is a proactive voice chat solution that basically just runs in the background, and whenever and it does so quite efficiently. And if players aren't doing anything wrong, nothing happens. It's only when players transgress, and by transgress, that means that means the player is violating the game company's TOC, right? And that's when the software kicks into action, generates a live report, and basically we can have everything that was said in front of if you want, you can put it in front of a community manager, or in fact just take action in under 45 seconds. So from the time that someone starts harassing someone in your game, that can be acted upon in less than 45 seconds. And that's the kind of response that we think is appropriate for this kind of behavior.
Yeah, and to add a little bit to what Hank is saying, it wasn't in this year's survey, but in our 2020 survey, we did ask around whether people are reporting or not, right? And we found about 60% of folks were not reporting, right, to their platform. And so I think that speaks to the need for more proactive efforts. Also, I think given the limited resources of many game companies, right, I could imagine a world in which, let's say, I was actually talking to someone about this morning. Let's say that you have an in-game group of the people called the 3%ers, who are an extremist group, right? In a general sort of filter for hate and harassment that's looking for slurs or looking for other things is not necessarily going to capture that the 3%ers are a dangerous white supremacist anti-government group, right? And so it's it's tools like ToxBot and other sort of more bespoke tools that actually do the work of having classifiers, right, that can detect these kinds of things proactively, right? Because the average player, I don't think is going to, I would hope, would not know what the 3%ers are, and wouldn't necessarily think to report that. But when you have proactive tools, you may be able to detect those kinds of things.
Yeah, exactly. And again, we see another question coming in. What impact does toxicity have on the bottom line for game studios? In all the data that we're, and again, I may ask Justin to chime in here a little bit, but in all the data that we're seeing, the fact of the matter is, it at worst, it may just be if you can deploy an effective, proactive voice chat moderation solution, at the very worst for your game, it'll probably be a wash. You won't see any, it basically pays for itself. And in big games where there's a lot of toxic behavior going on, you might even see a fair bump for that too. Again, a lot of data. We're still gathering data, but if you think about it, it just makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you have a large percentage of players churning out of your game, wouldn't it be better to keep those players? Game runners, game companies spend a lot of money marketing to players and getting players into their game, and to just then see that player just walk away because of toxicity in games, I mean, it kind of seems a little silly, really, when you think about it. So if there's a way to do something about that, one can have a positive impact on your game revenues, and at the same time, you're doing the right thing by your players. You're taking care of those players. You're making your game safe and welcoming for those players. And I think that's the kind of word of mouth that you want about a game.
Yeah, if I could jump in, because we've done a couple of interviews with game companies, with trust and safety boards here at ADL, and that was a common concern, is that there is a very hard, it's very difficult to explain to a CEO or the CFO or to the resident bean counters that X amount of trust and safety is equal to X amount of more dollars. It just doesn't qualitatively, there's no quantitative way to really suss that out. It's not that kind of benefit. The benefit that you do see is similar to what you're saying, Hank, is that it stops your churn of your players, which another thing that we discovered in our research is that there isn't really a lot of data that game companies have in how much churn is going over in their games. Like you have the data that shows this is how many game players we have, but not how many are leaving, how many are coming back to the game, how is this churn going on. So that's something that if game companies, especially the larger ones, not necessarily the small game studios, but if they could invest more money in that sort of research, then they would be able to sort of have a stepping stone to quantitatively say, okay, this is our amount of churn, and then we can go on and say, this is what trust and safety could provide to stop this churn. Another issue is not necessarily unless you're League of Legends and you already have a reputation for a certain kind of gameplay and a certain sort of experience. Most smaller game studios, most game players, when they first encounter a game, and I think our data, I could be wrong, so don't quote me on this. I think the last time we talked to someone in the field, about 50% of new players leave if they encounter a toxic environment because it's not worth it. It's not worth it to continue playing and investing my time into this game if it's going to be painful for me. It's different if you're a League of Legends and you already have that reputation. But if you're a smaller game studio and you want to keep new players invested, then you have to invest in trust and safety.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the other stats that we have from our survey is that year over year, we've seen the number of players who are quitting games because of hate and harassment has increased, right? We do look at things like, are people, having trouble sleeping at night and anxiety, right? And, these are not these are bad things for people who are targeted by hate and harassment. But, the bottom line is dollars for a lot of these companies, for all of these companies. And so, I think an important stat is that people, we're seeing the number of people who quit games because of harassment increase, and we're seeing the number of people who say, oh, hate harassment doesn't have any impact on me in games decrease, right? And so I think these are important stats for companies to consider when they're thinking about any kind of, pulling back on their investment in trust and safety or whether they should be investing more.
Yeah, and we see all of that on this end, and I thought what's interesting, there's a question here about how do you build back trust with your players if you implement something on the proactive side of things. Justin, if it's all right, could you speak to sort of how you folks at Gun Raiders, how you rolled out ToxMod, and what was the reaction from you talked about it a little bit earlier, but how'd that work?
Sure. I think overall we were, before the announcement, we weren't sure how the players were going to respond to something like that, like proactive voice moderation. In general, actually, the feedback or the commenting was pretty positive overall. I think most people don't like people yelling and screaming obscenities, and we have a pretty tight community. So I mean, people see something happening and they want to do something, but before that, it's just player reports, right? So, we created a video with one of our key influencers, and they rolled that out, kind of how it was going to work, the specifics, not Big Brother. It's this is the details of it. You're not getting spied on, and I think that went really well, and we had a dedicated Discord channel where anyone could field questions that they wanted. How does it work? And then once we rolled it out, I think overall, especially even now, players are really happy with the system. So much so that we've had a pretty big influx of players wanting to be part of, how can I help with the moderation effort? There is a group of our Gun Raiders community that kind of broke off, and they created their own group called the Toxic Hunters, and they're fantastic. Yeah, they're fantastic. There's a decent size of them, and we've given just a few of them access to some of the moderation tools to help us kind of pinpoint these bad apples, I guess. And then there's a whole group that kind of they go in, and if they find somebody in the game that's being toxic, they'll report them up the chain of command in this kind of deputized group, and then they'll help us, or they'll pass on those names to us, and then we can take action, either getting rid of them or not. So it's awesome. There's they have bounties on players to kind of check on if they've seen them have like toxic behavior. They go, their name goes on like a naughty list, and then they get hunted by other members of the community. It's really cool, and I think overall, especially in the ratings for the game, like the amount of people who are complaining about things like toxic behavior has gone down, which is nice. Less of those 1 stars about people just having that bad experience at first time, and they saying not worth it, I'm churning out. And there was a comment about the bottom line. I don't know. We're still a bit early. We're only like 6 months in or so. I'm a parent as well. Like, and I care about kids not being bullied as well. So even we've spent like 3 years building gun raiders. I don't want people to come in and just be bullied and then leave. That's not cool. So we're happy to kind of put that money forward, even if it ends up being break even or slightly less. I think if overall the game players are having a better time, that's something that matters to me. We ran a survey prior to having the proactive moderation, and then now we're running a survey now about 6 months later to see so we'll find out soon whether what the results are saying. But overall the vibe is positive, and it's better.
Yeah, gosh, the one thing I'd say to any of the folks listening, listen to what Justin. I mean, Justin, that's really great. I mean, you know what? It makes me want to it makes me want to go play that game. Right?
Awesome.
And if I give any headset gifts this year, the kids, whatever, it would be hey, try this game. I feel a lot better about going into the game. Even just knowing your mindset, right? That you're looking out for your players. That's terrific.
Cool.
I'm looking at some other questions here. When do you want to go to the poll, Mark? Yeah. We were gonna throw up some poll questions here for the audience. So this is these toxicity categories. These actually come out of. This is sort of how we classify toxic behaviors within ToxMod. And I guess I'd ask the audience, what do you think of the top two, right? Yeah, what do we think of the top 2 categories? This is just based on that players got flagged for in this last 30-day analysis that we did here at Modulate. It'll be interesting to get the audience's just put what they think it was. Yeah, there we go. Let's see. And while that's going on, let me just see if we can find some other. You sort of answered this, Justin, but there's a question here about how did you justify the initial investment into proactive voice moderation as a smaller studio?
That's a good question. Yeah, we've been working with Meta and seeing where they're headed, seeing how much money they're spending on their moderation efforts, and I think it was something that we felt was worth to try. We're not locked into like some massive expensive deal.
Right.
We found that based on our revenue, I think I think it's worth it to spend this chunk on moderation to see if it affects it. Maybe the bottom line actually goes up. We notice there's churn, we notice there's retention issues, and VR is notorious for retention issues anyway. So it's like, we spent all this money making the game, and why to lose players just because of this was so frustrating. So we thought, hey, let's give it a shot. We'll try it. So that's how we justified it. Whether it paid off, or at least even if it broke even, or if we're slightly down, if players are happy, I'm happy.
Yeah, that's terrific. No, that's great. Really great. Let's see, what else do we have here? Looking at other questions here. People are asking about behaviors on other platforms, other game genres. I guess the one thing, it's probably obvious to say that here, but generally speaking, the games that are the most competitive, the most, some of the biggest games that are the most competitive are the ones that have the biggest toxicity problem. And, again, getting back to the premise of this webinar, which is, again, in our experience, in other companies' experiences, I mean, I know Riot Games has been doing a lot of research into this for a long time. And again, it keeps coming up over and over again. Most of the players, most of the people who engage in toxic behaviors are really not, they're not just, toxic at their core. They're having a bad day. They had a bad commute home. They got home things, and then they jump online when they get home and say, I'll let off a little steam and just go play a shooter or whatever. And then things just don't go the right way, perhaps, or they just get, yeah. And then they end up just getting into a bad situation, and that happens to a lot of players. And so I think, again, we here think that really implementing a solution that can really get at those. Oh, and there's another point that we were all here on this panel were talking about earlier, that those bad eggs, they tend to normalize that kind of behavior within a game. So in other words, they're the lowest common denominator, and they sort of bring everybody down to their level. And if you can remove those players from your game, number one, and people can see that, they can see that result, that those players, players will very quickly adjust their behavior. The vast majority of them, anyway, will very quickly adjust their behavior and say, oh, guess what? I guess we can't do this anymore. Okay, fair enough. And then they just go on about their business, and I think then in that case you've done a lot of good for your player base. You've done a lot of good, hopefully done a lot of good for your own bottom line. And if nothing else, you can sleep better at night knowing knowing at least that you're doing the right thing. So at least that's, I know it's our business, but that's the way we think about it. Certainly here at Modulate.
While we are here on this topic, I'd like to add on to Omar's question. What are your thoughts on community moderation tools beyond reporting muting toxic players? And this idea of
go ahead, Morgan.
Yeah, there's a few that are, and this lines up with our research that we've done as well. Like there is I think our statistic, which might be a little different than yours because we're doing different games, we have different methodologies. It's about 95% of players aren't toxic. It's just the 5% who are spreading toxicity. However, what we did find is that just banning them or getting them off the game doesn't work. Because what they'll do is, especially if it's a game that they really enjoy, they'll come back around. They'll start a new account. They will, even if the account has been, they've had an account for years, they'll start a new account, or they'll you ban them suspend them for a little bit, they'll come right back. And the people who are affected are the 95% who aren't going to come back. So one strategy that we found that a lot of game companies are using or pivoting towards, and I think it's something that Justin is working towards as well as his game, is community resilience. Or instead of focusing on these 5% who, you're playing whack-a-mole trying to get them, they'll pop back up, they'll come back on. What you try instead is to build the community to have a certain kind of resilience to defend itself against these players and to keep itself from becoming toxic in the way that the players sort of want it to. So, for example, what Justin was describing, the toxic hunters, having a community Discord where they come together and say, hey, there's these toxic players who are attacking us. Sort of encouraging players to, build up a certain kind of resilience, or rewarding good behavior. So, for example, you play a game and you get, you can send kudos to other players, like, good job, you did a great job, building this sort of positivity and proactive, player sort of resiliency to defend against
positive behaviors. Yep.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, we're looking at something similar where, so we got reporting and muting is almost just like the baseline, and then now we're using these tools to figure out, okay, well, now we know who's bad, like how do we know who's good? And I think a lot of online toxicity, it does also result in just a random mix of people together that maybe wouldn't even get along that well in real life anyway. So it's like, how can we match make people that are similar in taste or age or whatever, so you play with people that I think you like or your crowd, if you think of it like that. And so whether that's through the whole idea of kudos, or like saying like I like this person, or this person's cool, like matchmaking with this person, or using these proactive tools to generate some kind of like a high level score where like these people are generally pretty chill and these people are maybe more toxic. If anything, can we keep the people that are chill together so that they're not encountering toxic people, and maybe the toxic people get mixed together, and that's okay because that's their crowd. Maybe I don't want to go there, but we had an idea where we would have a jail level where if you got enough reports, you would actually be stuck, and if you went into the game, you couldn't go to the other places. You would be in this jail area, and then you would be with the other inmates, and I don't know. We weren't sure if that would actually encourage people to want to try to see if they could get into the jail, so it didn't actually happen.
Yeah, I mean, we have heard in the past, that is a solution that some game companies have tried, right, where they match make people who are sort of repeat offenders, right? And I guess from our perspective, I feel like that's a sort of vector for potential radicalization, or for allowing people to, it reminds me of the kinds of experiences you probably have on like a 4chan or a Gab, right, where you're mired in the same kinds of heinous behavior, right? And so, I think to Morgan's point, right, the community element of pushing back against these kinds of things is almost as important as the platform piece, right? And so if the platform is putting you with repeat offenders, right, and then within that community, you're like, oh, well, I guess we just behave this way here, right? I think that potentially leads to more harmful outcomes, even if, in the short term, you are pulling those players out of the general rotation, right? I think, it raises a lot of questions for sure.
Yeah. There was an interesting question that came in, and I want to get back to it. Someone asked about free-to-play games, and do they have a specific effect on behavior? Is it increased, or does it change at all? The one thing I'd say about free-to-play is players will churn a lot faster in free-to-play because they haven't paid any money, right? So if players are playing, a shooter on a console game that they paid, $60, $65, soon to be $70 for. They're going to be less likely to completely stop playing. They might turn voice chat off. In fact, personally, most people I know who play shooters have voice chat turned off a lot of the time, unless they're playing with friends, because for all the issues that we've been discussing here today. So I would say it's on the free-to-play side. If you're running free-to-play games, it's even more critical that you do something about toxicity, because those players are just they didn't pay anything initially for the game. They're just going, nope, not this one, and then move on to the next one. So I guess that's what I would say about that. Wanted to get back to the survey results. So my own personal bias is I think the audience got it pretty close to right. Funny thing, as it happened, just in the survey that the one that we conducted for this webinar, believe it or not, sexual vulgarity was the number one, believe it or not, with racial and cultural hate speech second in there. And so I guess I don't know if it's any consolation. I think racial cultural hate speech is worse, and gender. The other one that we run is gender sexual hate speech. Personally, we feel those are two of the worst, because again, it's speaking about a person. It can be among the most hurtful, but sexual vulgarity was actually was the number one, believe it or not. So that's just
that matches to our data in terms of both the groups most targeted. If you look at if I can show this horrible slide again, this.
I know.
if I can, is that women are the most targeted group, right? In our data, which comes from the perspective of targets, right? But if you look at the second most targeted group, it's African American and Asian American and LGBTQ folks, right?
Yep.
So it is both gender focused hate as well as racial and other and sexual orientation beyond that.
Yeah. We had Dustin asked the question: most prevalent or most likely to be reported. It was that was the most prevalent. Again, on the data we're running, we were able to take the actual the data is about the players that were actioned, or at least identified as committing a toxic behavior. So that we can say that they did it. The one thing, and it was alluded to earlier by Justin. One thing we can always say with our data is, yep, they did it. We're looking at it. They did it, which, believe it or not, can be very empowering, because, as we know, people have a tendency to fib every now and again. I think we've hit all the questions at this point. Anyone? Daniel?
I mean, I guess I would push back a little bit on that last statement, right? I think that's something that we hear a lot from different companies about player reporting, right? And I think there's an important piece there, which is that something we hear from companies is like, oh, we don't really look that much at player reports because it's not a strong signal, right? People maybe feel like they're making up stuff, but like, what other way do players have to communicate to companies, right, about their experience, right? Like, I think it's certainly incumbent on players to don't report things that aren't happening, but I think also incumbent on companies to make the reporting process such that people to think about the ways in which you're building a reporting process that centers the experience of people who are most targeted and most vulnerable, such that they do feel encouraged to report, they do feel like they are being heard when they are reported, they do hear back from the companies. Right. So I think, it's just an important thing to add on to the fact that, yes, there are false player reports, but also there's work the companies need to do in terms of being able to, make reporting an effective process for people who are being targeted, especially from vulnerable and marginalized communities.
And there are ways.
I mean, if you're going to go ahead, Morgan.
Oh, there are ways with player reporting to sort of tease out who, if a player is lying or if they're not. So, for example, and not all companies keep track of their player reports, and they should. But if you're keeping track of player reports and you have player A who's been reported for saying the N-word, and it was on one game, well, maybe he's lying, maybe there was some sort of gameplay, but then there's on another round, and then another round, and then another round. Then you can sort of, the statistics of the likelihood that this player is actually doing it and that it isn't a lie becomes greater. If there is one round and player A is getting 50 reports from all different players in the round that they are being harassing and that they don't like their gameplay, it's statistically more likely than not that not all of them hate him, not all of them, are trying to, get this player off the game. There is probably likely some truth to that report. And we found another route, and there's, I don't want to say simple psychological tools, but because they're not simple, but they're simple, for lack of a better term, psychological tools that you can use to make your players feel heard. One example is once they send in a report, just sending a thank you, saying, thank you, we've seen your report, and we'll get right on that. And when it's action, another email that says, so we did something with this report. And that just, at minimum, makes players feel, okay, when I report something, someone heard it. It doesn't even have to be real. Someone might not even have heard it. It could have been just a automatic message. But it gives them a psychological feeling that someone is doing something happened. My report actually did cause something or someone to listen, so to speak.
Yeah, of course. I think from our perspective in Modulate, the much easier and simple way is just implement ToxMod. do what Justin did at Gun Raiders, and I think, honestly, I think you make your lives a whole lot easier.
Yeah. We do let, so we still have the normal player reporting on, and yes, please do report, because that helps us build a player profile on our side too. So, anytime somebody gets reported,
yeah, cool.
And anytime someone reports somebody else as well, because, if somebody, different people are maybe will report more or less, but, it kind of allows us to get to know people and so we have these player profiles that essentially this person reports a lot of people, and the people they reported actually were reported by other people. So, we know that guy is generally somewhat trustworthy. Yeah. And that all helps, definitely. So, keep reporting.
I'm personally a big believer. Anytime you can reach out and, have a communication with your customers and players it's a great thing to do, Yeah. When do they want to stop us, Mark? I guess we can concise definition of toxicity that you can share. Well, I guess, I guess one of the things you say here is it's look, you should treat other people the way you want to be. It's something that you pretty much have a good sense that somebody else isn't going to want to hear, right? Or it's going to either annoy them or make them feel bad, or it's generally that. I mean, I think at our core, I think we all know what toxicity is, and the bad part is in the online world now it's it's kind of a free for all. I mean, if people did in the real world what they did in the online world, I mean, honestly, some of them could get arrested, but they feel like it has lots to do with anonymity and online play, and and people just trying to get their frustrations out with whatever's going on. So, but I don't think there's really any hard and fast rule, for toxicity as a whole. Advice for frustrated players: find a game that's running Toxmon. That'll work. Yeah, play Gun Raiders.
I mean, maybe the answer is if they have something like the ability to be part of the community that is helping moderation. If they have community moderation, maybe that's one way that you can kind of feel like you have agency in this battle against these bad apples.
Yeah, good suggestion, Justin. Well, I think we're at time.
I did see that one for Zake. Zake, we can always follow that one up if you find me on LinkedIn or whatever. We can also chat about indie studios and if Modulate, or what my thoughts are on Modulate.
Yeah, by all means. Yeah,
I'm going to jump back in here. And just I will mention any questions that we did not get the time to ask on camera today will be sent out to our speakers, and they can respond to our askers privately that way. So just because we didn't get to your question during the conversation does not mean that it will go unanswered necessarily. So it's a great conversation with a lot to discuss on a super important topic. So I'm impressed how much you guys got into this hour window here. But that does about put us at time today. I want to say for our audience, before we part ways, please do direct your attention to our webinar survey available on the right of your presentation window. If you closed it, you can reopen it by clicking that icon along the bottom of your screen. We really do thank you in advance for filling out that feedback form. Your participation in the survey allows us to better serve you in the future. A huge thank you to our speakers today. Game Developer really does appreciate your time and expertise on today's very important topic. And we went a lot of very in-depth places that I think are helpful for developers and players as well. So I was very glad to hear that conversation happen. Thank you to our sponsor, Modulate, as well as everyone in the audience. We appreciate your attention and participation. Within the next 24 hours, every one of you will receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been able to listen to the event to watch that on-demand version after the show. This webinar is copyright Informo, while the presentation materials are owned or copyrighted by Game Developer and Modulate, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. That being said, on behalf of today's guests and Modulate, I'm Alyssa McAloon. Thank you so much for your time, and have a wonderful day.
You all too. Thank you very much, folks. Have great holidays.